Hi friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Thanks for joining me in my craft room today. I've got a bit of a longer video today because I was really excited about getting some of the new Sassy Club products in the mail a tiny bit early so I could make some inspiration to show and share with you while the release is still available. So I'm going to be using some of the new stamp sets and dies in today's video. So here's just a quick little overview of everything I'm using, but I'll talk about it more as I go throughout this video. I'm going to stamp all of my images first and color them in, so please use the chapters down below if you'd like to skip the coloring part. I do my best to make sure I've got chapters so it's easy to find what you're looking for within my videos. So just lining everything up inside of my MISTI, and then I'm using my Sassy Club Onyx Black ink pad to do all of my stamping today. It is alcohol marker friendly, and I'll be using my Oh Hoo Hoo Art Honolulu markers. I mostly have the B's, but I have some A's as well. So doing all of my stamping, adding my cute little faces into my kids' meal treat buckets. I'm also going to use just the sentiment from one of my stamp sets. So I'm just going to do a little bit of masking because I want to just cut out the spooky season sentiment. So the four different stamp sets I'm using today are the Candy Bucket stamp set, Nugs and Kisses stamp set, Season's Creepings stamp set, and the Spooky Season stamp. Now what's really cool is the Spooky Season and Candy Buckets can be free with your order if you order a certain amount. So I will link down the Sassy Club shop down below in my description, as well as everything else that I use, of course. So I'm going to go through my coloring, and for my greens and spooky season, I am using G390 and G490 as kind of a tealy green, I guess you could say. It's going to match the paper that I will use later on in the video, and I just did all of my letters with that combination. For my little ghost treat pail here, I'm using CG200, so the Roman numeral 2, because it's a white pail and I just wanted to give a little bit of shadow. So I added down that cool gray color, and I'm using my colorless blender to just kind of spread that color out, just to give it a little bit of shadow without having any color. You could definitely just leave this white if you're going for much more simple coloring. And I, of course, have all three of these from the release last Halloween season at this particular fast food restaurant. So I did grab each of my little buckets to match the color. Well, the green and the orange. I didn't have to match the white. So for the green pail, I want to go with more of a limey green. So I have GY5 as the darker tone, and I just outline the bucket completely around. And then to be the lighter color and to kind of blend everything together, I have GY4 as the second color. I thought about going back again with another color, but I wanted to keep the coloring kind of simple with shades of 2 rather than 3. There are some areas where I'll do 3, but I mostly do 2 shades for this video. So after my green bucket, I'm going to move on to the orange one, and I'm using Y10 and Y4 to color in this adorable pumpkin looking pail. And again, I kind of just follow the design with my darker colors, adding in shadows where the the image looks like it should have some shadows. I do try to keep in mind a light source when I'm coloring, but for this particular card, I really have no light source as I'm imagining my layout while I'm coloring. So the light source will be kind of center to all of my images. And I go ahead and just completely color in that bucket with that Y4 to finish off the orange. And that's the orange combination I'm going to use throughout the whole card. So there's another time I'll use these orange numbers. For my bathtub, I'm using that CG Roman numeral 200, CG020, and CG030. And I'm going to go back and forth with those colors as well as my colorless blender because I wanted this bathtub to look kind of dirty and rusty as it is inspired by this particular movie. So that's just how I colored that in. For my first little kid here on the left, I'm using G6 to color in his hair and B050 to color in his eyes and BG050 to be the darker tone of his mask, and then I'll use the blender to blend that out. And I'm going to go back with those two colors again, the G6 and the V060, to just add a little bit of shadow, some tone on tone blending. Or I'm sorry, V050. So that way it's just, subtle color there. A lot is not needed. For the kid in the middle, I'm using BR208, R050, and R29 to color in his mask. He has kind of a peachy pink mask, so I was trying to get a good color combination to make that look like a peachy pink. And his hair is R170 as the darker tone and R150 as the lighter. Again, I just start with adding in that dark tone and use the lighter one to blend it out. For my third, her hat is going to be P4 and P3. I'm just following the design of the hat to create some shadow where the hat kind of is bending and where there's some depth and dimension to it. And the P4 to P3 is kind of a big jump for some reason in the marker, so I do try to really blend that out. I take my time and really get in there. For her mask, I'm using G410, and I'm going to come back again a little later and just add a little bit of shadow with it, but I went ahead and skipped that part. For the black of my little pumpkin food character, I'm using my NG07, and all of the mouths that are open are with R8, and the tongue is with R12, and all of those golden arches throughout my card will be Y6. I'm also coloring in these little nugs with BRs. So my darkest tone is BR1, and then I bring in BR2 and finally BR3 to completely color it in. They're a little darker than I think I was wanting. I probably should have gone a little more yellowy brown with them, but I think they turned out so adorable. I can't wait to color the rest of these little nugs in. And that will be the color combination I do for all of these little nugs. So the eyes are sometimes different depending on how I Googled the original toys, but we'll talk about those colors as we get there. I'm bringing back in that NG07 for all of the blacks like this character's hair, but I'm going to use two colors this time instead of just the one when I colored in the jack-o'-lantern face, so I'm bringing in NG06 to be the lighter tone of my black hair, and it'll also be my witch's hat later. Now this green, I'm using G170 as the dark tone and G15 or 40, I believe. Nope, 30, G130 as the lighter tone, because the original toy, this is some bright lime green colors, so I really tried to find that color combination. And for the jacket and shirt for this little guy, I'm using V210 as a darker tone, and the jacket and the shirt are actually the same color. So I'm completely coloring in the rest of this guy with that color, and then V070 as the lighter tone. And then for his eyes, they're actually a blue color, so I'm using B070 as the darker and B050 as the lighter tone, and that completes that one. 2 down, 2 to go. I colored in the little spider sitting on the top of this mummy nug with the same black color combination. And now for the white wraps, I'm using WG0.5. I already colored in the golden arches with that same Y6. And then I'm also blending out that WG, that warm gray color, with my colorless blender. For this one, the eyes are V050 and V030, and then I colored in the mouth and the nuggets just like I did the rest, as well as the nugget of this cute little witch. Her emblem kind of thing holding her cape together is YR34, her lips were R170, and then I'm coloring her outfit pretty much the same as the hat that I did for my little witch character. So that P4 and P3 again. Her cape and her hair will be this color. Now I looked at the toy and they're actually slightly different purples, but I just went with the same color. For the hat, I'm using V020 as the lighter shade, and I realized it needed to be a little darker, so I brought in V050 and then went back to the lighter color to blend that out. Again, I used the same yellow for the rest of the arches on my characters, and her hat is the same black. I use my scan and cut to cut everything out. So let's just take a little look at all of these adorable images. I love these nuggets so much. I didn't even pick all of them from the stamp set because I knew I was going to make a mini slimline and they weren't all going to fit, but I'll be coloring the rest of those soon. So now that all my coloring is done, let's get some die cutting. I have a piece of black cardstock and I'm going to use the new Halloween Town die set to die cut all of these images out onto this black piece of cardstock. I'm using some mint tape just to help keep it in place, and I'm going to run it through my Big Shot switch. And I'm just going to take off all of these little images from out of my die and put it in my little tray. I'm also going to die cut my images from the new Poison Apple die set, and I'm going to make a shaker card with this one. I love that there are like different options you can use with these different die. So I'm going to pull off my little poison dripping face, and then as well as the apples. There's also like a little handle so you can turn this into a mug, and Sassy Club has an adorable poison apple mug as a stamp set as well. So you could probably combine those together really easily. I cut my apple and the outline for the shaker out of some red cardstock, the stem out of craft, my leaf out of green, and then the poison out of that same, I think I said earlier when I was coloring, kind of a tealishy green sparkly cardstock. And this one's from Lawn Fawn, their holiday sparkle paper pack. So punching that out of the die, because it is a little bit of a thicker paper, but it cuts beautifully as always, like all of these dies do. And here are all three ready to go. Now I am going to do the background of this card first, my little Halloween Town card, because it's going to take a long time to dry. I end up filming my first two cards after this at night, and then the next day my background was finally dry and I finished filming then. So we're going to work on the background for this card, but it'll be the last card we put together. I trimmed down a piece of mixed media cardstock. It's one of my favorite types of cardstock to do blending on. And I'm going to get out my grip mat here. This is the 6x6 from Waffle Flower. And I'm just going to stick that right to my glass mat, and it will help me with my stenciling today. I did an oversized sheet of mixed media paper, but I'll trim that down so it will fit my background when we get to that later in the video. I wanted to create a scene where the little bathtub is walking on a brick pathway, so I'm going to be using some stencils for this. First, I'm lining up the Rolling Hill stencil, and this is going to be how I add a light gray first. I want to make sure that my bricks have kind of a lighter gray color to be the, I guess, mortar. Is that how you say that? Part of the bricks, the cement stuff. Anyway, I'm going to use Lost Shadow Distress Oxide and my little blending buddy here for my Distress Oxides. I have two of each of these blending buddies from Trinity Stamps, and I have my oxides marked with a gray sticker on top. But anyway, so I inked on the Lost Shadow, and then I put my brick stencil down and put the same Rolling Hill stencil on top of that and added Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide. And then I moved my hill stencil up. I actually flipped it over and moved it up and masked off the bricks and added some black soot. And then I brought the hill mask up so I could add some Lost Shadow to my sky, but I didn't go too heavy in the top right hand corner so I can add in my moon. And this is the Moon Builder stencil, so I'm using the different areas of the stencil to build up my moon using Scattered Straw Distress Oxide. And finally, I'm going to add some clouds using the new Sparkle Tim Holtz Distress Texture Paste, and this is why my background takes forever to dry. Is I went crazy heavy-handed on this stuff. I don't know why I felt the need to make it super thick, but I did. and it just took a little time to dry. And honestly, I was crafting at night and I was getting a little tired, so it was a perfect excuse to call it an evening. But there you can see my clouds with the sparkle paste, and I'll set that aside to dry and we'll come back to it later. So I cleaned off my desk, and now we're going to jump into finally our first card assembly, which is going to be our Poison Apple Shaker card. Now I have this blend of sequins. They're red and pinks and whites, and I think a little bit of gold. And honestly, I have zero idea who it's by, so I will link down something similar in my list of supplies. I have a piece of acetate here, and I'm using the cutout inside of the apple um, border. That's going to be the outside of my shaker, the frame, and I'm using the inside piece just to cut my acetate around, just holding it in place and just using some large scissors to cut around it, and that way my acetate will be slightly larger than the opening of my shaker window. Now I wish I would have gone a little bit bigger, and you'll see why here. When I'm adding my double-sided adhesive to the back side of the frame for my apple shaker and I placed the acetate on it, I didn't get close enough to the inside edge of that apple, and there really is not a good adhesion to my acetate. So I peel it off, and I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive around the edge just to help with keeping that in place. Now I'm going to add some foam adhesive for my shaker later, so the acetate is sandwiched in there just fine, but I was just nervous about it not fitting properly and sequins escaping, so I added the liquid glue just to help with that. So I'm going to lightly tap it. I get liquid glue everywhere, of course, but it's fine. I went and washed my hands. And then I'm using Pear Blossom Press's Best Phone Tape Ever to trim it in half, and I'm going to use that to go around the edge of my apple. I love this foam tape because it is not sticky on the inside edges. It is sticky on both sides, so when I pour my sequins in, I did get a couple stuck, but it's not sticky when you start to shake it. And it's repositionable for a little bit, so if you don't get it lined up perfectly, that's okay. You can peel it off and put it in the right spot how you want it, and then after a couple hours, I believe, I don't remember exactly how long, but it will be stuck for good. Once I get my sequins in there, I'm taking the back of my apple and gluing and like sandwiching, I guess you could say, my shaker together. So I put a good, nice firm press and then give it a good shake. Make sure nothing is falling out, and my shaker is done. So I'm going to glue on my poison, but before I do that, I want to add my stem and my leaf. So I'm going to use my liquid adhesive to add my stem and my leaf in, and I end up not really liking how low my stem is, so I'm really happy that I was using some liquid adhesive because I could quickly, bring that stem up a little higher so you could see it better behind the poison part of my poison apple. I'm going to use some liquid adhesive for my poison sparkle cardstock as well. So just going around the design, I don't need to go all the way to the edges of the poison because it's actually a little bit larger than my apple itself. So it would just be excess glue if I went all the way to the edge on the left and right side. And what's nice about using liquid adhesive is it gives you a chance to kind of slide the cardstock around. I noticed that it was a little too low on the top left, so just kind of slid it up and covered the red that was showing. I picked out some ghost cardstock in my stash. I've had this forever. It's from Pebbles, but I will link down a similar kind of yellowy ghost pattern paper. And I use my PopsicleSticks mini Slimline stitched layer dies. This is the largest one. It measures 3.5 by 6.5, and I cut a card base to match that. And it's the perfect size for this apple, so I'm really excited to use this die set along with my poison apple. I added some tape runner all along the back of my background and glued that to my card base. And then I'm going to glue down my poison apple first. So I want to make sure my sentiment is in place how I want it. And I think this sentiment just works so well with the poison apple, like the spooky is curved, so it has enough room for my leaf and my stem of my apple. I added some foam adhesive behind the leaf and stem so they were secured to the background, and some liquid adhesive behind my apple. and went ahead and pressed that down. I'm adding foam adhesive. This one's a little bit thinner than the Pear Blossom Press. This is from scrapbook.com. And I completely covered my spooky on the back side. I'm using my grid mat to help me get it as centered as possible and gluing that to the top of the background and season to the bottom. And that will finish off my spooky season Poison Apple shaker card. I think it turned out so adorable. I love this stamp set, and I love how easy it was, or not stamp set, die set, and how easy it was to turn it into a shaker card. I did add some white highlights. You can see the final look here of how that turned out as well. Now my second card is a little bit of a more simpler card. I'm going to use 3 different dies from PopsicleSticks. These are from both the mini slimline stitched layers as well as the mini slimline scalloped frame. And I'm using the largest of the 3 nested mini slimline dies as well as the smallest, and then that scallop. So I cut the largest out of red, the scallop out of some golden yellow, and the smallest out of some white cardstock, and I'm going to layer all 3 of these together. So adding some adhesive runner behind my yellow scallops and placing that on the center of my red card, and then again adding some adhesive behind the white and placing that to the center of the yellow. And I'm sure you can have a good reason why, or good guess why I picked these colors for this card. And I'm just going to keep it simple like that. I thought about adding some ink to the bottom of that white cardstock, but I just wanted my characters to be the highlight of this card because they all just turned out so adorable. So I'm going to have my little bucket pails at the top, and then I'm going to mess around with the order of my little nugget toys here. I will, like I said, change it up as I go throughout the card. But I wanted a sentiment for the front of my card, and so I couldn't decide if I wanted Nugs and Kisses or Trick or Treat, but I end up going with Trick or Treat. So I'm going to grab one of the banners. I'm going to grab the smallest one from the mini slimline stitched layer dies, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to cut it out of some red cardstock, and I will stamp my sentiment onto that one. Now this slimline card will be the same size as my last slimline card. It measures 3.5 by 6.5. This is a kind of a newer slimline size. That's really what's available out in the market. And again, it's by PopsicleSticks, and I'll have her stuff linked down below in my list of supplies as well. So for stamping my sentiment, I'm going to use VersaFine and Onyx Black. I thought about embossing it in white, but at this point I have been crafting for hours. Even though my coloring probably was like 8 to 10 minutes in this video, it took me a long time to color in all these images, but I like doing it. I usually watch a true crime podcast on YouTube, or, right now I've been watching Supernatural for like the 1700th time. So I just listen while I color. So it did take me a while, but I wanted to leave in the coloring because I know I've gotten a few requests to show more coloring. So I left it in. It wasn't a full, obviously I kind of jumped around a lot, but I hope that it's useful to those who use Ohuhu art markers as well. So I went ahead and just used some liquid adhesive to glue down my 3 buckets. I kind of made them a little wonky so they looked like they were having as much fun as these cute little nuggets are having. And I'm going back and forth on my layout. This is going to be, I think, my final layout of the nuggets, but my sentiment strip, I was kind of struggling how I wanted to put it on, and I end up putting it on the bottom there. So I knew I could spread out my nuggets a little more. I didn't want to cover the cute faces of my little pails, so just, paying attention to that as I add my foam adhesive and glue down each of these little Halloween nugs. I'm again using foam adhesive. This is from scrapbook.com. It's a perfect thickness, and I also keep all of my adhesive scraps. Nothing goes to waste here when it comes to foam adhesive. But I'm going to go ahead and pull off the release paper, and I will start layering down all 4 of these little nuggets. So my little orange pumpkin is going on the left because I didn't want it to be orange on orange. Same with my mummy. I didn't want it to be white on white. So they're on the opposite sides of the pails that kind of match their colors. And then the witch and my Frankenstein monster are in the middle. Once I have all of those in place, I'm going to add a little bit of foam adhesive behind my sentiment banner, just in the middle where it will touch the white part of my background. And then I added liquid adhesive to the left and right side of that where I know they will overlap my nuggets a little bit, so that way it still is nice and secure to my card. And that will finish off the card. So let me get this onto a card base. Again, I cut my card bases 6.5 by 7 and I scored in half along the 7 to make it 6.5 by 3.5. So it matches the size of the largest die cut from this die cut set. I line it up on the folded edge side, so if it does, not line up perfectly, I can use my large scissors to trim off any excess of that card base. I did add some white highlights to these images as well, so here you can see a final look at that. Now my background is finally dry. Again, this is the next morning. I'm going to start working on assembling this card. So I know that I wanted my new Halloween Town frame to be, frame my background. So I'm going to do a little bit of cutting. I'm actually going to cut along the edge of my black hill. I don't have to follow it perfectly, but I want to make sure there's no white showing on the black side, so the bottom part of my background, because I'm going to actually just bring this up a little bit and cover where I cut it. You'll see here. So that way I can tuck in my little buildings behind my scene, but not really disrupt the overall look of what I ink blended. And here is just kind of a dry run of how I'm thinking I'm going to do the layout of the card, but it always changes as I put the card together. So now I'm realizing that I probably should have trimmed down my background before cutting it in half, because now I have to cut it nice and evenly so it will overlap well, but that's okay. I'm going to grab my paper trimmer and I'm going to trim off a little bit of the edge along the width, I guess, at this point. And the width of my background is 4 inches, so I know I want my background to be about 4 inches as well. So I'm trimming a little bit more off the non-moon side because I want my moon to definitely be most of my background. So once I trim my background to match the 4 inches, I know that it will fit along the width of my A2 size card. I have my card base ready to go so I can start layering everything together, and I know that I will need to trim it a little bit vertically as well, so along that it's a 5.25 inch. So I'm kind of looking at how much I need to trim off. Again, I'm going to overlap it, so I just kind of eyeball this trim just about, I don't know, less than 1/4 inch off the top and bottom. Maybe about 1/8 of an inch total, and now I know it will fit behind my black frame. But because my black frame is 4 by 5.25, some of my white card base is going to show, but I wanted to bring in some pattern paper for that. So I picked this yellow and black striped pattern paper, and this is from the Pumpkin Town 6x6 paper pad, and I also trimmed out a rectangle that would be smaller than 4 by 5.25, because you're not going to see it with all of my layering, and I don't like wasting any type of pattern paper in my craft room. So you're only going to see a little bit of my pattern paper. So I trimmed off trimmed out, I guess, what was not going to be shown. Now I'm gluing the next layer in my background, which is my sky. And I know it will fit evenly along the top and side, so I went ahead and used my tape runner to glue that down as well. My 2 little buildings here from the Halloween Town die set are going to be popped up, so I'm using some black foam adhesive for this one. This foam adhesive is from ThermoWeb, and it has a really nice thickness. It's not as thin, it's not as thick as scrapbook.com's or any of the extra thick. It's slightly thinner, so it helps with if you want to have a lot of layers on a card. It's a really nice thickness. So using my frame and my hills as a guide, I went ahead and used that foam adhesive to attach the larger building, and then I'm going to repeat that same process for my smaller building. Completely cover the back with foam adhesive, peel off the release paper, and then I glued it down to my background. And I made sure that they were kind of wonky. The movie definitely has a lot of fun and character and a lot of non-straight lines, so I wanted to really embrace that look. I added the same foam adhesive to my ground and glued that to the card base as well, again knowing that the sides and bottom would be even. I'm going to add more foam adhesive, but only to the top half of my Halloween Town frame because that's where it will touch the sky. And then I will add liquid adhesive to the bottom part right now because I forgot to put it on as I was gluing it down. And this is where it overlaps with the ground that already has a layer of foam adhesive. So now my frame is nice and even across the whole card base. Now that my background is done, I can add in my cute little characters in their mobile bathtub. So again, covering them with foam adhesive. This one time I used the foam I have from scrapbook.com. And then for the little bat bow tie look, I'm going to add that to the top middle of my frame. So I will just kind of use my fingernails to curve the wings of this kind of bow tie bat look, and I'm only adding adhesive to the center of the image, and I'm gluing that right to the top of the frame. And that will finish off my third and final card in this video. I love the look of the shiny clouds, even if it did take, all night for it to dry. So let me show everyone one more time all the cards. I have my Happy Meal Slimline, I have my Spooky Season Poison Apple Shaker Slimline, and then my Kids in a Bathtub in Halloween Town A2 size card. But I hope you enjoyed watching these come together, and check out the brand new release from the Sassy Club. There's so many cute new things for you to check out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!